Hi, everyone. This is Latoya from Amana Bible Institute, and I'm here to have a talk on human presence as partners with God in creation. I'm just going to share a little to our pages and we'll go ahead and get started. We are on Facebook and YouTube, but we are also in this really cool virtual classroom that I'd love to have you join me in. So if you are interested in joining the virtual classroom where you can actually have your voice heard by others, and or you can come in, be silent, and ask questions towards the end, feel free to do that as well. So let me just share to our different channels and we'll get started. Okay, one page down. Once again, if you're just coming in, um, just sharing to our pages here. But we are going to be discussing human presence as partners with God in creation. And I'd love for you to not just be here on Facebook, but if you'd like to come on into our personal classroom here, which you can do if you just click that link inside of the description box. It'll bring you right on over, give you a link to come into the class. I mean, you're not obligated to say anything. You're not obligated to show your face or anything of that nature. But this is an excellent way to get your questions answered um, and to participate if you like, or to even get the feel of being in a class. As always, feel free to ask questions on Facebook or YouTube, to make comments. We love that here. And we're going to go ahead and get started now. Let me just mute this phone. Okay. So, um, this is a webinar that's a part of our hashtag Presence Matter series. And hashtag Presence Matters is really interesting as a series. It features very, very important conversations, more so about human identity, but also more particular, it features discussions that focus on how we ought to exist in the world, and how we ought to actively exist in the world. You know, we often don't think of presence in forms of action or level of agency or whatnot. We just kind of think of presence in these terms that that are quite vague. In this case, you can have presence that is more active or have presence that is more passive. And it is often the case that when it comes to Christian doctrine, we are taught in so many ways um, to think of ourselves as, you know, clay in the hands of a potter. So we are taught to think of ourselves in as passive agents in the earth, as, you know, pawns in some kind of big divine game. But that's not really what the Bible teaches in one way or another. The Bible actually emphasizes the need for humans to be active, active agents and active partners. And so this is one of those talks that will help us to understand how humans can be active partners when it comes to creation. Um, and by creation here, I mean every bit of it. I mean other humans. I mean institutions. I mean the things created by human hands, the things not created by human hands. So also things like the earth. And a lot of this, just to let you know, is going to be about, I'm going to use this vague term, the earth. And sometimes I will literally mean the earth. And in other instances, I mean the things that exist on the earth. All of these things are really, really important to God. And the Bible really, really emphasizes this. So a lot of this talk is going to be coming from the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. They are both the same, you guys. A lot of people think the Hebrew Bible is different from the Old Testament. No, it's the same. Though the Hebrew Bible, in my opinion, Hebrew Bible is a much better term for the Old Testament because it speaks to the large number of people who utilize this corpus of the Bible, but it also, doesn't have the connotation of something being old or ancient or outdated or unnecessary, and there being something new and better. The Hebrew Bible is still very much important for today's society and for the Christian walk. So I prefer the term Hebrew Bible, but they are very much the same. And much of this talk is going to be discussing texts from the Hebrew Bible, though I will kind of push a few other texts in here that come from the New Testament. The theology and ideologies of the New Testament often rooted in ancient Israelite and early Jewish religion and belief systems, right? So very much rooted in Hebrew Bible teachings and interpretations of Hebrew Bible teachings, which is why I often find myself there. So, and I'm hoping that you guys will also find yourself there because the Hebrew Bible is full of mysteries and amazing goodness. We should all have access to that. So I will stop talking now and get into the actual discussion. So I've presented this PowerPoint in so many ways. I've organized it in thinking about there being four larger, things at work when we're talking about the connection between the divine, God, or the sacred, the earth, and humans. And I've separated these into earth as witness, human identity as subduer and caretaker, Sabbath and Jubilee, and human as destroyer. All of these present in the book, the corpus that we call, the Bible, right? The many books and corpuses that make up the Bible. So we're going to break this up here. And as always, I'm just going to kind of give you the details. I'm going to give you the deets. I'm going to let you know what the Bible says. And then towards the end, we can think about what this means for us. And I'll leave you to reconcile with what that might mean for you. So, earth as witness, one of the things is really, really clear in the Bible, especially in texts like the Psalms, is that the earth is a witness of God's love, of God's grace, of God's beauty, of God's power, of God's work. So we get this quite often in the text, and I just have a few references here. Some of these I will read, all of them I might not. So Psalm 33:5 really just talks about how the earth is a witness of God's love. It says, He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the steadfast love of the Lord, suggesting in so many ways that if you want to look for God's fealty to righteousness and justice, you look at the earth. And it's so really interesting how there's this connection between God's righteousness and justice and God's steadfast love as well. And by the way, I am reading all of these texts in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Genesis 1, we all know this very, very well. This is one of the creation narratives in the Hebrew Bible and really heavily focuses, for the most part, on God's ordering of the earth. And humans don't make it into that ordering until closer to the end. So it's all about God's care and concern and ordering of things like the stars, of light, the things that go in the light of the land and the things that go on the land, of the seas and the things that go in the seas, that kind of thing. And after every single aspect of ordering creation, the text concludes with God looked at everything essentially, and said, yeah, this is good, right? Really emphasizing the goodness of God's creation. And that doesn't start with the human, as it does in Genesis 2, the second creation narrative in the Hebrew Bible. It starts with the earth in Genesis 1. Psalm 104, verses 24 through 25 says, people go out to their work and to their labor until the evening. Excuse me, you guys, I'm a little blind in the morning. Oh Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Yonder is the sea, great and wide. Creeping things innumerable are there. Living things both great and small. This psalm in particular is really interested in looking at the work of God's hands, and that doesn't just start with the actual earth or land. It extends to the creations, the things that live upon the land, right? And talks about how numerous these things are. It talks about the sea and how over and all consuming the sea is, and thinks about all of the creatures that live in the sea, really emphasizing the works of God's hands. And lastly, I'll read a New Testament text, Romans 1:20. We've heard this time and time again. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. This he is God. So they are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. This text is often utilized to kind of clarify or justify some belief in God. If you want to find out if God exists, if you want to find God, you look at nature, you look at the earth, you look at creation. That's what this text is essentially saying. And so in this way, humans are without excuse. They looked out, they saw the work of God's hands, and they still went awry. We're still very much doing this today, if you really think about it, especially in our treatment of God's creation, which we'll get to later on. So the next aspect of this connection between the divine, the earth, and the human is human identity as subduer and caretaker. In Genesis 1, we find a very interesting reference to human identity and role in the earth. And this is actually one that people remember far more than they do the aspect of human identity in Genesis 2. So we're going to read both. Because these are really important texts, but they're also really important because these texts in themselves have been utilized to emphasize, some bit of justification of poor treatment of the earth, specifically Genesis 1. And I hope to combat such an interpretation of this text through the next two aspects of this connection. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life. I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and morning the sixth day. So this text is really interested in thinking through human identity in really interesting ways. You have the creation of these humans in the image of God, and ultimately these humans are given, power, symbolized by these very strong verbs: dominion, have dominion, subdue, right? I have given you, right? Almost in so many ways, understanding the creatures of the earth and the things of the land as being, gifts in one way or another to humans. I would argue that they are just as much that we are just as much gifts to them as they are to us, right? Nonetheless, this text has been used to justify human freedom in corrupting the earth, in depriving the earth of its resources, and in maltreating the earth. It's also been used in one way or another, on the other side of things, to help people to understand that with great power comes great responsibility. You are given power to subdue, to order things, to manage things in the earth. And you have to think about how to do that in responsible ways. And I would rather, if I have to choose one of these interpretations, I lean more so to the latter. And this is why, this earth gives us things that we need to exist, not just food. I mean, we need food, but that's not even, and we could go a few days without food, but you can't go a few days without air, you know? And the earth, the land, releases all that good old oxygen that we need to breathe in. And we too release something that plant life needs. We release carbon dioxide, you know? So that plant life can thrive and live. There's an exchange between humans and the land, an exchange that is necessary for all of our preservation. So the wise manager, right, the responsible conqueror or subduer, will be one who is mindful of the health of the earth and is not just interested in his or her own kinds, health, wealth, and comfortability. And the text, the Bible is really interested in thinking through how to exist meaningfully in these ways as well. And it's more so emphasized in these other texts that we're going to go through when we're talking about rituals like Sabbath and Jubilee, or when we're talking about the catastrophic events that occur on account of humans maltreating the earth. So let's read one more text and then we'll get to that. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it." Right? Completely different purpose in Genesis chapter 2. Also, justification as to why these are two very different narratives. There are other reasons too. And if you're interested in really seeing the differences, because oftentimes, because of our ideology, our minds are blocked from these differences. But if you actually take pen to paper and you look at things like the order, what was created, the order it was created in, how it was created, there's how God is labeled, very, very different narratives here. And you can learn more about that in the Hebrew Bible class. I'm teaching Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. It starts in August and it's a 12-week class here. You can pay in payments, so you can split that up into 3 payments. Nonetheless, back to this. Humans in Genesis chapter 2 are here to care for the earth. They are caretakers, not subduers, not conquerors, not, dominators of the earth, So there's a very, very different take here. And the humans' care of the earth is symbolized in a whole lot of ways. It is Ha-Adam who names the animals. It is a serpent in chapter 3, a creature of the earth that that the humans are in communion with, they're in conversation with a creature of the earth, and in conversation about a tree existing in this garden, right? All of this is rooted in so many ways in the language that represents fruitfulness, that represents, bounty, and all of the things that are produced by the earth, right? But also earthliness, right? Having the serpent, who creeps on the earth, right? So there's a lot in the text, but it in one way or another reminds the human that we are connected to all of this, and we are ourselves creations of this earth. Nonetheless, let's move on to Sabbath and Jubilee. So this is interesting. If you've been coming to webinars with the Mana Bible Institute for a while, you know that I love me some readings on Sabbath, because Shabbat, Hebrew term for Sabbath, is radical, man. It is not just a ritual. It is not just something that people do. It is not temporal, and when you're thinking of it as a ritual, in your mind, it becomes something that you do religiously, something that is tied to time. But it isn't. When you really read the Hebrew Bible and you have an understanding of all of these types of Sabbaths, it becomes really, really clear that this is not about its temporal nature. This is less about ritual and more about morality. It's less about how you relate to God than it is about how you relate to people, because your relation with God, your good and proper knowing and communication and rightness with God, has everything to do with your rightness with people, with earth, with land, right? And Sabbath reminds us of that. Even its placement in the Decalogue or in the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy 5 is really telling of that. It's a bridge commandment connecting love of God to care and concern and love of people, right? It's right in the middle of that and has references within the commandment itself that refers to your fidelity to God, but also refers to your connections and relationships with humans. So I do want to read these texts because they are extremely important and much more important than we talk about today. So Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 10 says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Remember, very, very important Hebrew Bible teaching and emphasis here to remember. Excuse me for that. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, right? Starts off, remember this day, keep it holy. 6 days you do you, but this one day is for God, right? Rooted in religion, rooted in cultic fidelity. But then towards the end of the verse, or in the end of verse 10 to be more specific, where it says you shall not do any work, it qualifies that. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your town. This is a day of rest, not just for you to remember God, but you're remembering God by allowing your family to rest, and also all of the things or people that are more so considered property in one way or another, the slave, right? And the things like the livestock, right? Really important here. And I think what's more interesting to me in this text is that people don't think about what's happening here. These people live in agrarian society. They live off of what they can, glean from the earth. But this is the day you can't touch the earth at all. You don't take from it. You don't reap a harvest. You don't do any of that on this day. This day is a day of rest for your land, just as much as it is for you and your family, for your slaves, for the foreigner, for your livestock. Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 through 15 is similar, except it uses different verbs and gives you reason why you need to do this. So it says, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Emphasizing here, overly emphasizing versus Exodus chapter 20. In case you didn't read that your slaves are not meant to work, let me emphasize they must rest, right? Like, which is fascinating to me about this text. And Deuteronomy's review of the Ten Commandments is fascinating for other reasons too, and how it's really a clarifying text. Just in case you didn't understand that in Exodus 20, let's go back over that and let's break this down a little bit more. Nonetheless, verse 15 says, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. This is a day of remembrance, a day where you remember how God saved you from slavery, which also accounts for why you are gracious to your slave on the Sabbath. You remember God's freedom, freeing you from slavery by offering some freedom, just a little bit of freedom to your slave on this day in so many ways. It is a day of remembrance of God's works, right? But at the same time, there's heavy emphasis on you not working and your livestock, and they even specify your ox or your donkey, right? Donkeys utilized to carry heavy loads, oxen often utilized to mow the lawn, right? This is a time of rest for them. And in so many ways, once again, rest for the land. Now, if you didn't understand that the land is meant to rest in your weekly Shabbat, the text offers you some clarity. So this clarity comes in Leviticus chapter 25 and mostly Leviticus chapter 25, but also a few other references, like there is one in Exodus 23. So I don't want to read all of these texts. I don't want to make this webinar longer than it ought to be, but I will let you know what this land Sabbath is. This is, and I'll read maybe verse 20. Let's read 25. I'm going to read 3 to 4. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in their yield. But in the 7th year, there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. This is the year where you don't reap what you sow. You don't sow either. You do nothing to that land. And the text continues to go on, and there are questions as to, well, then how do we live? If we can't take from our land, how do we eat and how do we make our money? How do we thrive as a society? And the text will answer the question for you by suggesting that in the 6th year, God will allow the land to produce so much and to be so bountiful that in the 7th year, you won't have need to harvest anything or to sow anything. It is meant to be a year where the land is left alone and it is allowed to get wild, essentially. You don't touch it. You don't mow it. You don't do anything. You just let it be land, let it grow and be what it wants to be, which is really, really fascinating when you think about this land Shabbat, but not as fascinating, in my opinion, as what happens with the year of Jubilees. So the year of Jubilee occurs after every 7 cycles of 7 years. So after 49 years. So in the 50th year, you have this year of Jubilee. It is essentially this year of freedom and manumission. And not just freedom and manumission for people, but for land. It is the year you check yourself. And it really brings about a good and proper understanding of what Sabbath is, whether it is the weekly Sabbath, the Sabbath of the land, or the 50th year, every 50th year, the year of Jubilee. And I'll just read a little bit of this. So it says that on this day, you shall return, every one of you, to your property, every one of you to your family. And that 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow or reap the aftergrowth or harvest the unpruned vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you, and you shall eat only what the field itself produces. In this year of Jubilee, you shall return, every one of you, to your property. When you make a sale to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not cheat one another. When you buy from your neighbor, you shall pay only for the number of years since the Jubilee. The seller shall charge you only for the remaining crops. These are the crops that are remaining from the 6th year. Right? Because you're not harvesting anything in that 50th year, in that 7th, in that 50th year. So it's everything, the bounty that you've collected before that. If the years are more, you shall increase the price. And if the years are fewer, you shall diminish the price. You shall not cheat one another. That's what I wanted to get to. But you shall fear your Lord, for I am the Lord your God. And this is only a few verses of this chapter. The entire chapter, for the most part, talks about what happens in this year. And what happens in this year is quite phenomenal. It is a year where people have to check themselves. You can't be greedy. You can't treat people wrongly. You got to let the poor, you got to let those who don't have, the orphan, the widow, to freely get. They can peruse that land, essentially. That is, not being touched, and they can eat. They're taken care of. You have to evaluate your treatment of people, essentially. It is a time for the dismantling of oppressive systems. So this is also a time where you have to consider the freedom of your slaves. And that happens, by the way, in every 7th year as well. So every land Shabbat as well, or every 7 years of your slaves, slavehood too. But nonetheless, these Sabbaths and these larger celebrations, of Sabbath, like the year of Jubilee, are all there to really fight against the oppressive systems, to really dismantle poor economic systems. It is meant to be, in so many ways, a time where humans think about their treatment of other humans, and they, correct their wrongs. Greed doesn't belong in this year. And unnecessary labor or oppression doesn't exist in this year. Read the entire chapter, you guys. It is really phenomenal what's happening here. And it's less, when you really think about it, it's less about what you're doing, how you're not touching the land, and more about what it means to not touch the land. Who gets access to the land as a result of you not gleaning everything from it. And also, not just who gets access to it, but the land's ability to just rest and, not have to deal with being worked on by humans. So it's really interesting ritual, but it is one that is very much rooted in concern for not just land, but people. And it is often the case that the Hebrew Bible connects its concern for the earth, for the land even, in its concern for how people treat people. And that's where we're going to go to now. So the human as destroyer. So this occurs and is discussed in a number of ways. First off, there is emphasis in so many ways on violation of the law as leading to the destruction of the land. The human becomes a destroyer of him or herself, him or her people, and his or her land. And that is really emphasized here. So I read this text to you when we talked about the sexuality talk, specifically on homosexuality, but I'm going to read it again. It's Leviticus 18:24-28. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, for by all of these practices, the nations I am casting out before you have defiled themselves. This is what happens when you defile yourself. Thus the land became defiled, and then I punished it for its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. Right? The land is defiled on account of human action. And this defilement results in the land removing, essentially evicting people. This is really interesting because I don't think we talk enough about this, at all. We often talk about God in so many ways evicting people. We talk about the exile as a moment in time where God sold the people to another nation, due to their improper worship and their heinous acts. But we don't talk about its impact to the land enough, right? Why God would do such a thing, right? And oftentimes it is for the preservation of the earth, the preservation of the land. And you see that here. Defilement, human defilement, having the ability to defile, pollute the land, and the land having to get rid of that pollution. Now, it also roots this or connects this to following God's commandments. So it says in verse 26, but you shall keep my statutes and my ordinances and commit none of these abominations, either the citizen or the alien who resides in you. For the inhabitants of the land who were before you committed all of these abominations, and the land became defiled. Otherwise, the land will vomit you out for defiling it as it vomited out the nation that was before you. Really important here. We're talking about the promised land here. The reason why the Canaanites could no longer live in this land, the Bible will argue here in Leviticus 18, is because they committed heinous acts and it defiled the land. And the land is the thing that in so many ways is vomiting out the people. So I'll go to another reference here, and this is all over the prophets, you guys. You cannot read the prophets and not hear this. But I'll read Isaiah 24, one prophet. I won't give you 10,000 like I normally would. Starting in verse 4, it says, the earth dries up and withers, the world languishes and withers, the heavens languish together with the earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth dwindled, and few people are left. Why are there few people? Because the earth is responding to its defilement on account of human action. Now, this might seem really, really weird, but I'm just gonna put in this shameless plug for, on behalf of science, think about what heavy manufacturing has done in the earth to our air, and how this impacts even things like our ozone layer. I'll just leave that there. So, the Bible is offering answers, you guys. Answers that we should be hearing. The earth matters. How we care for this earth matters. How we consider its preservation matters. And it is, while a lot of this is rooted somehow in following the law and in ritual, ritual is less temporal and more about states. When you want to look out, for the state of humankind, you must look at the earth. This is essentially what the text is saying. You want to figure out, what's happening with humans, state, defiled state or non-polluted state. You look at the earth, you look at its condition, you look at what it's doing. And it's really interesting here that human transgression of law results in a curse, and the earth is impacted by that curse. Now, that is not abnormal, because if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, you read all of these blessings and curses. It tells us pretty clearly that if you follow God's commandments, you will be blessed in the city, blessed in the field, and all of your blessings are not just rooted all of these blessings are not just rooted in human success, but it is human success as it relates to the earth. This is an agrarian society. Their success is related to their ability to profit from the earth, and the earth is good to them because they are good to God. Now, if you are disobedient to those commandments, you get like 4 times the amount of curses as there are blessings. And they are bad. The earth is not good to you when you are not good to it, and you're not good to it when you're not good to God, is the idea here. And Hebrew Bible laws are rooted in concern for humans and creation, and that includes the earth. So, really important here. I'm going to just say one other thing. Well, a few other things about this one other thing. Moral impurity is super duper important in the Bible. It is a thing you don't hear enough about. Once again, you don't hear enough about any of this stuff, but especially moral impurity. We think about the impurity of the Hebrew Bible, and we think of things like a woman on their menstrual cycle, a woman who just gave birth to a child, a man who was just sexually active. Yes, all that stuff defiles you. People who touch corpses, they have a deceased loved one. You're polluted, temporarily ritually impure for making contact with the corpse, and all of these other things, that you could do that will make you ritually impure. But what is thought less about is what moral impurity is. Moral impurity it's the category of impurity that consists of heinous crimes, whether it is crimes against oneself, poor sexual practices, murder, high levels of violence, genocide, thievery. These are the crimes or the acts that lead to an impurity that the sacrificial system can't just wipe off you. You can't go to the temple and be like, I just killed someone, make me pure. That's not how it works in the Hebrew Bible. What happens is essentially all of these acts do something to the earth. It does something to the state of humans. It does something to the state of the land you're living in. It does something to the temple. They become impurity to all of these things. And every year there's this day, Yom Kippur is what it's called today, the Day of Atonement, where people pretty much, you can think of it as like a fumigation tent for, moral impurity. You know how a fumigation tent will get rid of the insects in your house, the rodents in your house. The Day of Atonement is like the fumigation, not just for the people, not just for the priests, not just for the land, not just for the temple. It is everything. It is fumigation from moral impurity so that the earth is no longer polluted and is no longer at risk of vomiting the people out. And this is really important, you guys. Really, really important, because we think of Jesus's sacrifice for us on account of Hebrews chapter 9 and 10 as Jesus being the atonement sacrifice for us. on account of our moral impurities. Jesus is essentially essential to our fumigation tent, if I can say it that way without being offensive to anyone, because I really love this ritual and I love the ideology here, so no offense here. But just to kind of help you understand how important this is, Jesus becomes that for us, cleansing humankind, but not just humankind. Jesus' sacrifice was bigger than the sacrifice for humans. It's not just to take away the sins of humans. It is to cleanse the land. It was to cleanse, religious centers like the temple, right? It is to bring cleansing and freedom and purity to everything. If we are to think of Jesus as the sacrificial lamb of Leviticus chapter 16, then that is how we must see it. Jesus' sacrifice was more than a sacrifice for humans. And we have to also equally see that everything that is done in our minds for the sake of humans is often deeply connected to the earth. It means the earth is impacted by human action and by what is done for or by on behalf of humans, So even if you want to take a more androcentric look at this, you have to emphasize and understand that the earth has a lot to do with it. The land has a lot to do with it. I'm going to read Leviticus 23, 26 to 32 to kind of help you understand the Day of Atonement a little bit more. And then I'll just read one more reference. And it is one that really, really drills in God's concern for the earth. Humans destroyed in so many ways because they poorly cared for the earth. So Leviticus 23 says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, now the 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall deny yourselves. This is talking about the act between humans. Don't do it, right? And present the Lord's offering by fire. And you shall do no work during that entire day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement on your behalf before the Lord your God. For anyone who does not practice self-denial during that entire day shall be cut off from the people, and anyone who does not work or who does any work during that entire day, such a one I will destroy from the midst of the people. You shall do no work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations and all your settlements. It shall be to you a Sabbath of complete rest. Yom Kippur as a Sabbath of complete rest. We've talked about Sabbath quite heftily today. And you shall deny yourselves. Emphasis on the denial of yourself. On the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening to evening, you shall keep your Sabbath. Now, lastly, and I have here like a little slide with all of my references here for all 4 aspects of divine, human, and earth connection. I want to conclude with this. Revelation chapter 11, verses 16 through 18. We know what happens in this text. When chapter 11, we get the 2 messengers of God, scary creatures, or scary people, if you saw the Left Behind movies. And pretty much on this day, we get in this chapter, we get the 7th trumpet sounded. And when this happens, the elders say the following: we give you thanks, Lord God Almighty, who are and who were, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath has come, and the time for judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and all who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth. Yeah. So, there are lots of things you can get from this talk, but one of the things that becomes in one way or another inescapable, I hope, for you at this moment is that God has deep concern for this earth, deep care for it. And oftentimes, when you find that there are crazy things happening in the world, crazy things like this pandemic, you have to look at how people are treating the earth. When you're seeing all of these interesting, weird aspects of or things that are happening with climate or storms or weather patterns, you got to think about how we're treating the earth, right? Humans are connected to it and our actions impact it deeply. And it is more often than not that the earth's, the risk of the earth not being preserved is, I guess, apparent, right? It's quite high. And it is important that we understand how deeply connected we are to it, right? In order to work towards some kind of success and some kind of freedom to exist well, right? We are connected to it. I mean, I've already said this earlier. It gives us, in so many ways, it gives us the air that we breathe in. We give it what it needs to grow. We are deeply connected to it. And we need to act that way. So I do have someone in our Zoom class. I'm checking Facebook and YouTube. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I don't see anything on Facebook or YouTube. Any comments in the Zoom classroom? Okay, so let me go ahead and let you know our offerings, and then I'm going to jump right off. So we got a lot going on here, as we always do with ABI, and we are going to be releasing our fall offerings quite soon. Nonetheless, our next webinar will actually be a real talk webinar on female agency in biblical text. We're going to be talking about the power that women have in biblical text, which is going to be really fun and interesting. And once again, these real talk webinars are all just candid conversations. They don't come with nice fancy PowerPoints. They're just talks. You know, we're just kind of brain dumping. So do come out and brain dump with us. You can also RSVP for free to be in the classroom and have a chance to brain dump verbally. So do RSVP and do show up and come. It's going to be fun. We have a few other webinars, like we have one where I'm going to be discussing Karam and genocide in Joshua. There is God-sanctioned genocide in the Hebrew Bible, and I'm going to be talking about it. I'm going to be talking about how we ought to be looking at these texts. And yeah, it's going to be rough, but it's a conversation that's definitely necessary. And then we have a few other webinars here. There have been some changes to the calendar. So if you notice a webinar on these sheets or on these posters that you do not see available on our page, it is because it is no longer available and we will have to reschedule it. So do let us know if one of those webinars is something that you were really anxious to learn or to hear about, and we'll make sure that we get that rescheduled as soon as possible, as early as the fall. Last but not least, we have 4 classes going on. One going on right now. It meets in 1 hour, actually. It is Prophets and Prophecy in the Bible. I'm happy to send anyone a syllabus if you'd like to see what we're talking about from week to week, because you can just pay a small fee and come into the individual session if you like. Today we are talking about the prophetic burden, and really a lot of the conversation will be on what the prophetic burden is. Is it the word? Is it the prophet? I will argue that it is both. And I will argue this using a few texts that we read for today. I also created a little fun prophets game using those texts that we read. So if you're interested in prophets bingo, not bingo, actually. I think I called it What's in Jeopardy for the Prophets. So it's Prophets Jeopardy. I'm happy to send you that free link and you can play this game. Um, there's also 3 courses that will be offered in August. Introduction to the Old Testament is a 12-week course. If you want to learn more about how the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible can be helpful to you, to your growth, can produce greater understandings of the New Testament, come and register for this class. While we will not be talking much about the New Testament, we will be talking about ideologies that are important to the Hebrew Bible, and that will give you the ability to think through how this responds to New Testament ideology. We also have Nurturing the Prophetic Imagination, which will meet on Fridays in August. Great, great course. And last but not least, a free course that I will be teaching called Bible Language Tools Online Resources. It starts August 7th. It's on Saturdays, 11 a.m., and it's going to be fun, but it's free. So come take it, learn how to deepen your study of the Bible. I do have a manual that I'm creating for this course, so you'll have the chance to purchase my manual, which I'm sure will be really, really helpful to you. So come out and learn for free. And that will be all. So I hope you guys have a fabulous day. And thank you for coming.